Ethan Cole was supposed to leave for college in 7 days. 7 days until the road trip north. 7 days until the dorm keys and new books and cafeteria trays. But on July 22, 1995, one warm, cloudless Saturday night, Ethan disappeared. No struggle, no witnesses, no goodbyes, just a vanishing. And for his mother, Karen Cole, that night never truly ended. Portland, Oregon, a city balanced on mist and memory. The kind of place where the days melt into each other, coffee shops, train whistles, and moss-covered sidewalks. But in the summer of '95, the weather took a turn. It was dry, oddly dry. The kind of dryness that makes the air brittle, like something might snap if you speak too loud. That evening, in a quiet neighborhood southeast of the Willamette River, Karen Cole folded laundry in her living room. The air conditioner hummed softly. A distant dog barked. Her son's duffel bag sat open on the couch. She'd packed his toothbrush, extra socks, a flashlight. You never know, she'd told him. Ethan had smiled the way teenagers do when their mothers fuss, half amused, half embarrassed. The sun was beginning to fall behind the trees. Orange light slanted through the blinds, striping the hallway in soft golden bars. Ethan came downstairs in a gray T-shirt and jeans camera strap slung around his neck. He always carried it, a black Nikon FM2 with a small crack near the battery door. It had been a birthday gift from his grandfather, a retired newspaper editor who believed the world looked clearer in black and white. Heading out, Ethan said, grabbing his keys. "Be home by midnight," Karen called after him. He paused, hand on the doorknob. "I'll try," he said, and gave her a grin, the kind that says, "Don't worry, I've got this." It was the last time she saw him. Ethan was 18, quiet, bright, a little shy, but not withdrawn. He loved photography, astronomy, and indie rock cassettes. He once spent 2 weeks building a pinhole camera out of a cereal box for a science fair. When he was 10, he got lost in the woods for 6 hours and ended up calmly photographing tree bark until rescuers arrived. He had just graduated from Lincoln High. In the fall, he was set to attend the University of Washington to study environmental science. His dorm assignment was already in his wallet. His roommate's name was Cody. They'd talked once over the phone awkwardly about shared mini fridges and alarm clocks. That night, Ethan was going to a friend's backyard party. Nothing big. Just a few classmates, some pizza, maybe a fire pit. They were saying goodbye to the summer to each other. At 10:46 p.m., Karen's phone rang. It was Ethan. He told her he was heading out soon, might stop for a soda. Nothing unusual. His voice was steady. She heard someone laugh in the background, maybe a girl. Then the call cut off. At midnight, Karen waited on the couch. At 1:00 a.m., she stood at the front door porch light flickering. At 3:17 a.m., she called Ethan's number again. No answer. By sunrise, the duffel bag was still untouched. His bed was neatly made. His car, a green Toyota Corolla, was gone. She made coffee. Then she called his friends. None of them had seen him since around 11 p.m. He'd left the party on foot, saying he needed to clear his head. Karen drove the neighborhood. She checked the corner store. She walked a trail Ethan liked behind the high school. Nothing. No sign, just early summer birds and the distant churn of sprinklers. At noon, she called the police, and the officer on the phone was polite but cautious. "He's 18, he said, a legal adult. Maybe he just needed a break," Karen insisted. "He doesn't do this," she said. "He's not impulsive. He has plans. He's leaving in a week." They opened a report. A missing persons bulletin went out that evening, a photo of Ethan from his yearbook cropped tight. Brown hair, hazel eyes, 6 feet tall, wearing jeans and sneakers. 2 days later, Ethan's Corolla was found in a commuter parking lot on the edge of the city, near a bus stop. The car was locked. Inside, nothing. No wallet, no camera, no sign of a struggle. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than Ethan usually set it. Karen noticed that immediately. Detectives dusted for prints. They found smudges, nothing usable, no blood, no fibers, no signs of foul play. The car was towed. The lot was searched. The nearby woods were walked. But there was no trail to follow. It was as if Ethan had walked into the air and vanished. In the weeks that followed, Karen made posters, black and white flyers, with Ethan's photo and a phone number. She taped them to lampposts, pinned them in coffee shops, left stacks at gas stations. She went on local news, her voice steady, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I just want him to know he's not in trouble," she said once on air. "I just want to know that he's safe." The calls came in. A hitchhiker in Bend, a boy with a camera in Salem. None were Ethan. One caller claimed to be holding Ethan for ransom. It was a cruel hoax. Police traced the number to a payphone near Eugene. By August, leads had dried up. The case grew cold. Karen refused to accept it. Every morning she wrote in a journal notes to Ethan. "Today it rained," she wrote on September 3rd. "You always hated rain, didn't you?" She kept his room untouched. The duffel bag remained on the couch, zipper still half open. Birthdays came and went. College started without him. Cody, the would-be roommate, dropped out a semester later. By winter, the police had moved on. They said there was no evidence of a crime, no proof. Ethan hadn't simply chosen to leave. Karen knew better. One night she sat alone in Ethan's room, flipping through his photo albums. Landscapes, forests, shadows on concrete. One picture, taken days before he vanished, showed a dirt path winding into trees. On the back in pencil, Ethan had written one word, "Watch." A year passed, then 2, and still Karen waited. Some nights she would wake, convinced she heard the front door open. She'd walk downstairs barefoot, breath held only to find stillness. Just the wind. She never changed the locks. Years later, a detective named Ray Mullins, newly transferred from Seattle, reviewed Ethan's file. He requested the old witness interviews, the car impound report, the phone records. Everything was clean, too clean. He noted the oddities, the position of the driver's seat, the absence of the camera, the strange photo with the word "watch." But with no new evidence, even Ray couldn't do more than file a supplemental note. Then he met Karen, and something in her conviction stayed with him. She didn't speak like a grieving mother. She spoke like someone waiting for a door to unlock. 14 years would pass before anything changed. 14 summers, 14 birthdays, 14 Christmas mornings with a single stocking untouched. And then on a Tuesday in March 2009, a small brown envelope arrived in Karen's mailbox. No return address, no postage stamp. Inside a single object, a locker key. Cold, rusted, stamped with the number 8372. Karen stared at it for a long time. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew without question it was from Ethan. The room remained untouched. Ethan's bed still made his duffel bag, still sitting half-zipped by the couch. But now the silence carried a different weight. It wasn't just absence. It was a question. And Karen Cole was running out of ways to answer it. The official search had faded. The case had slipped into that cold gray drawer where missing boys go to be forgotten. But Karen hadn't stopped. She began her own investigation, not with detectives or maps, but with shoeboxes and memory. She started in his closet. Old jeans, flannel shirts, hiking boots. Then she opened the drawer beneath his desk and pulled out the black canvas pouch where the Nikon was there wrapped in a blue bandana, and beneath it 4 rolls of undeveloped film. She stared at them for a long time. They looked ordinary, but so did everything else about July 22nd, until it wasn't. Karen drove them to a local camera store, one of the few that still processed film. She handed the rolls over with shaking fingers and waited 3 days. When the envelope arrived, she locked herself in Ethan's room and spread the prints across his bed. Landscapes, trees, blurred city lights, and then something different. A parking lot. Empty. Taken at night. She knew it wasn't their neighborhood. There was a gas station in the background she didn't recognize, and an old sign that read Benson Commuter Lot, Zone 4. Karen drove for nearly an hour before she found it. A cracked stretch of pavement off the freeway near the edge of town. And when she pulled in, something inside her chest collapsed. It was the same lot where Ethan's car had been found. The photo had a timestamp. 10:41 p.m., 5 minutes before he called her. She brought the picture to the police. They reopened the file reluctantly. A new detective, Ray Mullins, agreed to review the location's security tapes if they still existed. By some miracle, they did. Footage from a grainy overhead camera showed a figure entering the lot around 10:40 p.m. The image wasn't clear, but the posture, the stride, it could be Ethan. He walked to the corner of the lot, stopped, turned. Then another shape entered the frame. A truck. Boxy, light-colored. It idled. Ethan moved toward it. And then the screen went white. The tape ended. Karen felt like someone had pulled the floor from under her. For 14 years she'd believed Ethan was taken, forced away, stolen. But this footage raised a harder question. What if he left by choice? The detective tracked down an older man who worked the late shift at the gas station next to the lot. He remembered a teenager waiting around that night, said he looked nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. He got into a truck, the man said, didn't look forced, but didn't look happy either. Karen pressed for more, but the man shook his head. That's all I saw. I didn't think much of it. Kid probably running from something. Running from what? At home. Karen took another look at the photograph. She noticed something, a sliver of reflection in a window. Zoomed in, enhanced. It showed part of Ethan's face. His eyes. They weren't afraid. They weren't at peace. They were waiting. Whatever Ethan saw in that lot, whatever he was walking toward, it wasn't freedom. It was unfinished. Detective Mullins filed a new report. He marked the case open again. No longer dormant, no longer ignored. But there was nothing else. No plate number, no description of the driver, no clue where the truck went. The trail ended again at the edge of a parking lot, just like before. Karen pinned the photograph to the wall. It hung beside a map of Oregon with 3 red pins stuck in home school and now this place. The triangle between them held more silence than she could bear. She went back to the film pouch hoping for more. There was one item she hadn't noticed, a folded piece of notebook paper, blank on one side, on the other in Ethan's handwriting, "Don't follow the truck. It doesn't end there." She stood in his room as dusk settled over the house. No more birds outside, no more noise, just her heartbeat and the weight of a warning. She didn't know what the truck meant, didn't know where it had gone, but Ethan had seen something. And whatever it was, he'd chosen to leave this behind. A photograph, a timestamp, and the quiet sound of a boy stepping into the dark. There are 2 kinds of silence. The kind that follows peace, a warm hush, a closing of the day, and the kind that stretches out across years unbroken, where nothing answers and nothing moves. That was the silence Karen Cole came to know. After the photograph, after the video, after the truck. The investigation lingered for a few months, but no new leads came in. Eventually, the case file was moved from active to archive. No evidence of abduction, no suspects, no body. What remained was absence, and a mother who refused to fill that space with anything other than truth. Karen stopped working full-time. She kept Ethan's room the same. Every morning she opened the blinds. Every night she turned on the desk lamp. A ritual, like lighting a candle in an empty church. She joined online forums for families of the missing. She printed fresh flyers every 6 months. She sent letters to news stations hoping for coverage. Most never called back. A few did stories. Local segments with fading interest. A mother's hope, they called it. But hope isn't the word Karen would have chosen. What she had wasn't hope. It was refusal. Refusal to accept easy endings. Refusal to believe silence meant death. In 1999, she launched a website. It was simple. Just Ethan's photo, a short timeline, and a P.O. box address. She updated it every year, even when no one visited. By 2003, most people had stopped asking. The neighbors moved on. The city changed. But Karen's routines didn't. Every Tuesday she wrote a letter to Ethan. Long or short didn't matter. She kept them in a wooden box by her bed labeled "For when he comes back." Her friends told her she needed closure. But Karen wasn't interested in closure. Closure felt like a coffin someone was trying to hand her before the funeral had even been scheduled. There were moments, brief and brutal, when she thought about giving up. Once in 2005, she took all the flyers, photos, notes, and shoved them into a trash bag. She left it by the curb. But that night she went out barefoot in the rain and dragged it back inside. Because what if she needed it again? Time played tricks. Some mornings she would forget just for a second and think Ethan was still upstairs. Then reality would settle in heavy, familiar, cruel. Detective Ray Mullins had stayed in touch unofficially. He sent her Christmas cards. He called on Ethan's birthday. He admitted the case haunted him. It didn't make sense. Disappearances like Ethan's, they usually ended fast. A body, a confession, a trail. But Ethan had left only fragments, a photo, a timestamp, a key. One day in 2007, Karen received a call from a producer at a national talk show. They were doing a segment on long-term missing cases. She agreed. On air, she spoke with clarity and restraint. No tears, just facts. A mother walking the edge between presence and memory. When the segment aired, thousands watched. But no one came forward. Then silence again. It was during that silence that Karen noticed something strange. The website she'd nearly forgotten had recorded a new visit. Just one. From a computer in Washington State. No message left. No contact. But the page viewed, the only page opened, was the About Ethan section, where she'd posted a short bio, favorite songs, books he loved, his dream of becoming a conservation biologist. It wasn't proof, but it felt like something. She told Ray. He looked into it, but the IP address was registered to a library. Untraceable. Still, she began checking the site daily. No more activity. On Ethan's 32nd birthday, she lit a candle, wrote her Tuesday letter, and said aloud to an empty room, "If you're out there, just send me a sign. You're okay." 2 days later, she received a package in her mailbox. No return address. Just her name written in thin, neat handwriting she didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. Inside was a single item, a locker key, number 8372. She held it in her hand. It was old, rusted, heavy, the number engraved deep into the metal. No note, no explanation, just the key. Karen sat down at the kitchen table, key in one hand, letter opener in the other, and she began to cry for the first time in years. Not from grief, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. A shift. As if after 14 years of silence, the story had decided to speak again. The package had no return address. No handwriting Karen recognized. Just her name in thin, careful strokes, as if someone had written it slowly, deliberately, with a ruler underneath. Inside the key. Worn, cold, rusted at the edges, but still strong in her hand, engraved with 4 digits, key 372. She stared at it for hours. She knew it was real, the weight of it told her that, but the question it carried was too sharp to hold. Who sent it? And why now? Karen drove to the post office where the envelope had been processed. The clerk scanned the barcode. It had been dropped in a general collection box in Seattle. Seattle. It was the city Ethan had been headed to in 1995. The college he never reached. The place where everything was supposed to begin. Now, 14 years later, it was calling her back. She called Detective Ray Mullins. He was hesitant at first. It had been years since any movement. But the key intrigued him. It wasn't a house key. It wasn't for a car. The cut, the shape, it looked like a locker key. Ray contacted the Seattle Police Department. After a few days and a string of forwarded emails, they confirmed a match. There was, in fact, a storage locker under that number, rented in a Greyhound station near downtown Seattle. Unit 8372, paid in cash. No ID. Registered under the name E. Callan. The first payment had been made in September 2009, just weeks before the key arrived at Karen's doorstep. She took the train up herself. It felt surreal riding the rails north, the same direction Ethan had once planned to travel. Outside the window, forests blurred by, and mountains watched from a distance. She tried to imagine what he had seen if he had ever made this trip. At the Seattle station, a transit officer met her and Ray. The key fit. The locker creaked open. Inside was a dark blue canvas bag. Dusty, zipped tight. A thin layer of mildew lined the corners, but it hadn't been tampered with. The officer stepped back. Ray put on gloves. He unzipped the bag slowly. Inside were 3 items. a worn leather notebook, a stack of Polaroid photographs, and an unlabeled cassette tape. Karen didn't speak. She couldn't. She stood frozen as Ray laid the contents out on a folding table in the back room of the station. The notebook was old, the edges curled and stained. The first few pages were blank. Then came a mix of entries, erratic, short, sometimes just fragments. The handwriting was Ethan's. One entry read, Tacoma Woods, June 23rd, don't go back. Another, saw them again. Same van, same eyes. And then I shouldn't have followed Lance. Karen looked up at Ray. Whose Lance Ray didn't know. Yet. They turned to the photographs. Most were landscapes, trees, roads. One showed a dirt trail leading into thick forest. Another blurry appeared to be taken from inside a car. A side mirror. A face partially visible in the reflection. The final photo stopped everything. It was Ethan. But not Ethan at 18. Ethan older, maybe mid-20s. His hair was longer, his face leaner. He had a beard. He stood in front of a cabin or shack surrounded by pine. He held a camera in his hands, looking directly at the lens. It wasn't a portrait. It was a warning. A message. His eyes, haunted, deliberate, seemed to say, I'm still here. But not for long. The cassette tape was taken to the forensics lab. It would take days to clean and digitize the audio. In the meantime, Ray searched for the name Lance in connection to Ethan's school records. He found it. Lance Brunner, same graduating class, same photography club, reported dead in the summer of 1995. Accidental fall from a cliff near Tacoma. It had never been connected to Ethan's disappearance. But now it was impossible to ignore. Karen stayed in a motel that night 2 blocks from the station. She didn't sleep. She kept thinking about the photo, about Ethan's face, about the silence that now seemed full-packed with things unsaid, unseen. The next morning she returned to the station. The technician handed Ray a USB stick. The audio was ready. Karen listened in a private room. The lights dimmed. A single speaker sat on the desk. She pressed play. There was static, then a voice. His voice. Ethan. It was shaky, tired, but unmistakable. If you're hearing this, I don't know what's happened. I don't know if I'm alive. I need you to understand I didn't want to disappear. A pause. I saw something. Lance and we thought we were just taking photos, just exploring, but we saw something we weren't supposed to. They knew. Another pause. Breathing. They followed me. I've been hiding. I don't know who to trust. I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop running. Karen sat motionless. I never meant to scare you, Mom. I thought it would be over by now. But it isn't. If you get this, it means I've finally decided to tell the truth. A long silence followed, then the tape clicked off. Karen didn't cry, not yet. She just sat there, hand pressed against her chest, as if steadying something inside that might break loose. Ethan hadn't run away. He'd been running from something. And now, after 14 years, he'd left breadcrumbs. A notebook, a voice, a face in the woods. The locker had been a message, not a grave, not a goodbye. It was a beginning. There's a difference between hearing someone speak and knowing they're alive. The cassette was real. The voice was real. And for the first time in 14 years, Karen Cole wasn't holding on to the idea of Ethan. She was holding on to Ethan himself, his breath, his fear, the unmistakable crack in his voice when he said, "Mom." She listened to the tape again and again. Each time she closed her eyes, trying to imagine the room he'd been in, the sound of the walls, the pauses between sentences, the part where he whispered as if someone might have been listening nearby. The words weren't rushed. They were measured careful, like someone talking through a fog of exhaustion. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a confession. "I thought it would be over by now," he had said. But it isn't. Detective Mullins requested an audio forensic specialist to clean the tape further. They enhanced background sounds, filtering out static, amplifying faint tones. What they found was strange. At the 14-second mark, a low hum, rhythmic mechanical, not from the recorder, but something in the background, possibly an engine, possibly electrical equipment. At 32 seconds, a bird call, not one commonly heard in urban areas. It was later identified as a Pacific wren native to dense coastal forests in Washington and Oregon. At 1:03, something even more chilling. A knock. 3 soft taps, as if someone was behind the wall or waiting for him to finish. Karen sat in the lab as the specialist broke it all down. These weren't just sounds. They were coordinates, clues. Someone or something had been nearby when Ethan recorded the tape. He hadn't just wanted to leave a message. He wanted to be found, or at least understood. Ray opened a new line of inquiry. He began tracing Pacific Northwest sites that matched the wren's range and were located near electrical substations or isolated roads. There were dozens, but one stood out, a forested region near Olympia, Washington, state land, unpatrolled. And according to a ranger's field report from 2006, it had signs of illegal camp activity. Ray and Karen went. Together. The road to the area was long and broken, mostly gravel, with tree roots snaking across the edges. Fog settled in layers between the trunks. It was the kind of place sound moved strangely echoing back in whispers. They parked near a rusted gate. Karen stepped out first. The ground was soft. Her boots sank slightly into wet moss. It smelled like pine and iron. They followed a trail. At first there was nothing but forest. Then they saw it. A clearing. In the center, the remains of a tent collapsed, torn at the seams. A makeshift fire pit. Burned out logs. A pile of stones with something wedged beneath them. Ray moved the rocks aside and pulled out a small metal box sealed shut with tape. Inside were photographs. Ethan again. Different angles. In the woods. Sometimes blurry, sometimes clear. One showed him walking with a duffel bag over his shoulder, looking over his shoulder. Another showed him crouched behind a tree camera, in hand, staring at something just outside the frame. And then one more. This one was different. A man, older, unshaven, in a military-style jacket, standing next to a dark van with no plates. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking past it toward the trees, toward whoever was holding the lens. Karen felt cold seep into her spine. She asked Ray to stop. She sat down on one of the logs, staring at the photo. "I think they were following him," she said softly. Ray nodded. Or he was following them. The notebook they had found in the locker had more entries that now made sense. Mentions of a them of eyes in the woods, of watching from under branches. It sounded paranoid, delusional even, but the photos weren't delusional. They were evidence. One entry stood out. "If I don't make it, tell her I'm sorry, but I can't let them find me. Not yet." Karen read it twice. She whispered the words once under her breath. Not yet. Back at the station, Ray compiled the items for evidence. But there was one problem. None of it pointed to a crime. No direct threat. No body. No confirmed abduction. To the system, it was still a missing person. Voluntary disappearance. But to Karen, it was something else. Proof of life. Proof of danger. Proof that Ethan had tried not to vanish, but to speak. The tape was a warning. And now it was their responsibility to listen. Ray made one final call that week. He reached out to a retired forest ranger who had worked in that area back in 1995. The man's voice crackled through the line. "I remember 2 boys came out that way one summer," he said. "Asked a lot of questions. One of them had a camera." Ray asked if he remembered their names. The man paused. "Don't think they ever gave them, but they looked serious, like they were chasing something they didn't understand." Then he said something that changed everything. "I remember one of them said, 'If anything happens to us, find the tape.'" Ray hung up. He looked at Karen. "You were never supposed to find that locker by accident." Karen's eyes welled. "They wanted me to. The cassette, the key, the photos, they were placed. Timed. Hidden, but never lost. Not if she kept looking. Ethan wasn't trying to disappear. He was trying to leave a trail. And now, piece by piece, she was following it. Forests don't keep secrets. They bury them. Under leaves, under snow, under silence. The area around Olympic National Forest was thick, almost prehistoric moss hanging from branches like old curtains, the air soaked in mist and rot. In certain places, GPS lost signal. Footprints vanished after a few feet. Sounds echoed in directions that didn't make sense. And somewhere out there, someone had been living off-grid for years. They called him the Quiet One. Locals described him differently. Some said he was a recluse. Others thought he was just a rumor. A man who came into town only twice a year. Wore layers of flannel, kept his head down, paid in cash, then vanished again into the trees. A park ranger remembered him, said he once left behind a torn-up backpack half buried near a creek bed. Inside were empty film canisters, a rusted utility knife, and a photo, black and white, slightly water-damaged, of a teenage boy standing in front of a trailhead sign. It was Ethan. Ray and Karen drove out again. This time farther than before, into parts of the forest rarely patrolled. The ranger gave them rough coordinates, a region where campers had occasionally reported hearing footsteps outside their tents. Not animals. Human pacing. No voice. No light. They hiked for hours. The trees swallowed them whole. The deeper they went, the more the world felt suspended, like time itself was uncertain. Then they found it. A clearing hidden by overgrowth, not marked on any maps. In the center, a small shelter, more structure than tent, built from scavenged wood and tarp. Half collapsed, weather-beaten, no smoke, no fire, but lived in, recently. Karen stepped forward, her hands trembling. Inside the shelter, a cot, a sleeping bag, 2 crates stacked as a table, a tin mug, a worn paperback copy of Walden by Thoreau. Next to it, a notebook. Ray picked it up slowly. No name, just page after page of short, fragmented entries. I move every 7 days. They still look for me. She doesn't stop. I hear her voice sometimes like wind. August 3rd saw tracks, not theirs. Hers. Karen took the notebook and sat on a log. She read the last entry twice. If I stay, they'll find me. If I leave, I lose the trail. I keep circling, waiting for the right moment. The sun filtered through the canopy, painting streaks of gold across the page. It felt like reading someone's thoughts mid-sentence, like he was still out there just a few steps ahead. They searched the area for hours. Behind the shelter, they found a tree with knife marks carved into the bark. Symbols, dates, some scratched out, others fresh. One date stood out, July 22nd. Every year the same date carved again. The day Ethan disappeared. Karen stepped back, hands covering her mouth. It wasn't just memory. It was a ritual, a scar on wood to mark another year survived, another year away. Then they found the Polaroids, tucked into a plastic bag inside a coffee tin buried beneath rocks. There were 8, all taken in the same forest, some blurry, some clear, but one was unmistakable. A photo of a man, face obscured by shadows, standing just outside the shelter, taken from inside, as if the photographer had been hiding. And then another taken later from higher ground. The same man, the same jacket, same posture. But this time he was looking directly into the camera, not startled, not surprised. As if he knew he was being watched. Ray took the photos back to the station. He ran them through facial recognition. No matches. But the jacket that was different. It bore a patch, faded but visible. It took 2 days of cross-referencing to find it. Private security contractor, defunct since 1996. Formerly operated out of Tacoma. Karen didn't need proof. She remembered that word. Tacoma. It had shown up in Ethan's notebook, in the first cassette. It was where Lance Bruner, Ethan's high school friend, had died. Everything was circling back. Karen pulled out the last photo. It was Ethan again, this time from behind, standing at the edge of a ridge, looking down at something below, out of frame. Trees bent by wind, a clearing, a structure. It was too distant to tell, but Ethan's posture said everything. He wasn't running. He was watching, tracking something. Ray closed the evidence file. He looked at Karen. Whatever this is, he said he was in the middle of it. For years. Alone? Karen nodded, eyes fixed on the photograph. No, she said quietly. He wasn't alone. Not the whole time. Because someone had taken those photos of Ethan. Which meant someone else was out there too. The forest wasn't empty. And the silence wasn't silence. It was surveillance. Some stories begin long before anyone realizes. Long before the photographs. Long before the tape. Sometimes the ending is buried in a chapter no one bothered to read. Lance Bruner had never been part of the investigation. On paper, he was just a high school classmate, one of many who drifted in and out of Ethan's life. But he had been mentioned once. Scribbled in a torn journal entry, I shouldn't have followed Lance. For 14 years, no one had asked why. Detective Ray Mullins requested Lance's file, cause of death, accidental fall. Summer 1995, just weeks before Ethan vanished. He was found at the base of a cliff in the Tacoma foothills. Hiking trip, the report said. Alone, No foul play suspected. But the autopsy included something strange. Multiple bruises inconsistent with a single fall, and dirt embedded deep into his palm suggesting he'd been crawling before he fell. Ray met with Lance's parents. They hadn't spoken about their son in years, not since the grief became too heavy to name out loud. At first they were cautious, then Karen arrived, and something shifted. They remembered Ethan, said the boys had been close that summer, closer than anyone knew. Both were on the school newspaper, both interested in photography, both curious. Lance was always digging, his mother said. He asked questions adults didn't want to answer. His father hesitated, then added that last summer he worked part-time at a research facility. Private, out by the woods near Tacoma. Karen leaned in. "Do you remember the name?" He nodded slowly. Rydell Institute. Ray looked it up. The Rydell Institute had once been a privately contracted environmental lab, government-adjacent, but technically independent. It had shut down in 1996. No clear reason. Some said it lost funding. Others whispered rumors. Ray found a former night security guard, now retired, living in Spokane. He agreed to talk off the record. He remembered 2 boys, high school age. Said they'd come around the fence line after hours, snapping photos, talking about something they'd seen. "I told them to leave," he said. "Didn't want to get them in trouble. But they were scared. Not of me, of something else." He paused, then added, "A week later, one of them turned up dead." Ray showed him a photo of Ethan. "That's him," the guard said. He was the one asking all the questions, so the timeline was clearer now. Lance sees something, tells Ethan. They investigate, then Lance dies. And 2 weeks later, Ethan disappears. Karen sat quietly processing it all. She remembered Ethan's photos, the ones from that final roll of film. Several showed trees, fences, gates, but one had a sign, blurry tilted. Still readable, property of Rydell Institute, authorized personnel only. She'd missed it before. Now it was like the image screamed. Ray filed an official request for archived government records. Most of them came back redacted. But one document, a maintenance report, listed multiple electrical failures during the summer of '95. Unexplained spikes. Tampered locks. Karen asked the question no one else wanted to say out loud. What was Rydell really doing? Ray didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because he knew just enough to be afraid. There was one final piece to chase. The missing tape. Ethan had said it in his recording, "Find the tape." He'd recorded more than one. The cassette in the locker was just part of something larger. A confession, a breadcrumb, a message in code. Ray checked pawn shop records. One entry stood out. A cassette recorder, same make and model as Ethan's, sold in Seattle in 2006, paid in cash. The clerk had written down a name, now faded. But the address matched a post office box that had once belonged to a man named Ellis Rydell, founder of the Institute, dead since 1999. The mystery deepened. Karen reread the final page in Ethan's notebook, the one no one could understand before. It read, "There's a file. Lance copied it. I hid the backup. If they find it, they bury me. If you find it, you bury them." For the first time, Karen understood what she was holding. Not a missing persons case, a cover-up. And her son had been caught in the middle. She opened Ethan's last photo again, the one of him on the ridge looking out into the trees. In the distance, now that she stared long enough, she could just make it out. A building. Square, windowless, almost invisible through the brush. It wasn't a memory. It was a destination. 14 years searching. 14 years asking. Hoping. Folding flyers into envelopes. Keeping a room untouched. Listening to a voice on a cassette tape that was never meant to be found. And now there was a place. The building in the photograph. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a cabin. It was something else. Karen and Ray traced it to a decommissioned research site outside Shelton, Washington. On paper, the structure didn't exist. No tax record, no power grid, just a square in the forest that nobody was supposed to see. They drove out on a fog-heavy morning. The dirt road was almost gone, overgrown, washed out by seasons of rain and time. Every turn felt like it might be the last. Trees pressed in close. At one point they had to continue on foot. The building stood in the middle of a clearing half swallowed by moss and rot. Cinder block walls, metal door, no windows, just silence. It hadn't been touched in years. Ray forced the lock. The door opened with a metallic groan. Inside, darkness. Cold air. Concrete floors stained by weather and age. On one wall, an old whiteboard. Faded words. Equations. Scrawled notes that didn't make sense to either of them. In the far corner, a filing cabinet. Locked. Ray pried it open. Inside were old tapes, labeled only with numbers. No names, no context, no case file. And in the back, tucked in a plastic sleeve, a cassette. Labeled in Ethan's handwriting, copy. Karen held it in her hands. The tape was warped but intact. They took it back to the lab. The audio began with static. Then Ethan's voice, calmer than before. Measured. If this is being played, then I guess I didn't make it back. A long pause. I never meant to vanish, but I couldn't stay. Not after what we saw, not after what happened to Lance. He talks about the night they snuck in, about security cameras, about rooms full of equipment they weren't supposed to see, words they didn't understand, surveillance footage, names on lists. They were watching more than animals, Ethan said. They were watching people. He says Lance downloaded a file, something encrypted, something big. And after that, the threats began. Phone calls with no voice, a man in a van outside Ethan's house, a warning carved into the side of Lance's locker. I knew we had to disappear, he said. But Lance didn't make it, and I barely did. The tape ends with a sentence that sat in Karen's chest like an ember. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't run away. I ran to keep you safe. She sat in silence for a long time after. Then she walked outside. The sky over Seattle was soft that day. The kind of gray that makes the whole city feel like a memory. For a while, nothing happened. Weeks passed, then a postcard. No return address, just a photograph. Ethan, standing on a snowy ridge, beard thicker now, older, stronger. He held a camera in one hand. The other was raised mid-wave. On the back, one sentence. I still see the light in your window. Karen framed the postcard. She placed it on Ethan's desk next to the lamp that had stayed on for 14 years. She didn't need an ending. Not anymore. She had something better. Proof that love could cross silence. Proof that somewhere out beyond the edge of the world her son was still walking through the woods, still watching, still alive.